Каира и до Гренландии, закованной во льдах. И на экваторе звенели балалайки, и шел по глобусу наш русский пляс. Российской кухней славились хозяйки, над миром плыл шаляпиновский бас. А к небу поднимались наши храмы, тянулись к звездам русские кресты. Лечила водка ностальгии раны в минуты радости и в дни тоски. И часто оскорбления сносили за темные дела наших вождей. Но, презирая их, мы Родину любили и были преданы и верны ей. Прошли года, и пронеслись стихии. Шум кривотолков медленно умолк, и можем смело мы сказать России, что перед ней исполнили свой долг.
My name is Raymond Zivert. I came with my parents in 1949.
My name is Raya Zivert. We came to Australia in 1949. We were refugees. We were called stateless people. We had no state because my parents were running away from communism.
My name is Helen Moore. My maiden name was Pajadaev. I came as a refugee to Australia in 1951, first to the refugee camp in Bonagillane at Albury, and then later through a series of refugee camps to Adelaide. My family was very oriented towards the church, and the church in Adelaide in the early 1950s was the pivot of growing Russian community in Adelaide.
Меня зовут Протерей Владимир Дедюкин. Я настоятель этого прихода. Был назначен в Аделаиду 1989 года.
My name's Father Paul Tokarev. I'm the Reverend Deacon of the St Nicholas Parish in Wayville, Adelaide, South Australia. I've been serving in that capacity for over 5 years.
My name is Natalie. In English, it's Natalie Stanko. In Russian, it's or formally Natalia Vasilyevna Stanko. So I was born here in Australia from Russian-Ukrainian parents, and I've been involved in the church for most of my life. But in particularly when I was 19, I was invited to join the church choir, and this is where the choir sings.
I'm Ksenia Meissner. It is my married name. I was born von Sabler, and I came to Australia when I was 11 years old with my mother and my stepfather, and I have a younger brother. After a war-torn Germany and lived in a refugee camp for 6 years, and of course coming to this country was like paradise. It really was like paradise. It was magnificent. We thanked God every day, and I still do, that we came to this wonderful country.
My name is George Burkholz. I'm born to a family of immigrants that came out after World War II. My father was Latvian, and on my mother's side, Russian-Ukrainian family, and growing up largely influenced by my mother and grandparents. I grew up in the Russian Orthodox traditions, or Orthodox traditions.
Мое имя Флавий Федорович Адунов.
Я Дина Ужигаева. Я родилась в Китае. Приехала в Австралию в 1984 году.
Мое имя Евгения Губина. Я приехала сюда из Маньчжурии, из города Харбина.
One of the things I've learnt about Russians, wherever they go, certain Russians, one of the first things they want to do is build a church. Their faith is part of their essence, it's the core of their being. Eventually, people got together, bought this block of land, built the church out the back here in the position it is as a temporary church, a Russian school behind the temporary church, which has been replaced since, and everything was positioned to be able to let us build a permanent church as resources became available.
The church is small and has a very cosy feel, but there are also a few physical reasons as to why it is the size it is, because there's just enough room, I think, on the eastern side for a car to get through, and then there's like a walkway on the western side.
And the people here really wanted to follow the traditions, so we bought the church was built as a traditional 14th, 15th centuries Novgorod style church. People went to the effort of making sure the altar would face to the east, like a traditional Orthodox church should. And through the 60s and early 70s, the church was built with voluntary labour, where effectively everybody of my generation, their grandparents and parents, were building the church using voluntary labour on literally every Saturday for, let's say, round figure 10 years.
With the most beautiful church we have in Australia, it is proportion and also its iconography. So it's a magnificent, beautiful, beautiful building.
The Orthodox Church has a missionary component, in the sense that we don't hide under a rock. So we have the church is obviously very Russian looking, and also from the external view, that there are the domes, the cupola, there are crosses. So that's something that you don't see in normal sort of Australian type architecture, for one.
The building presented a certain number of problems because the location, I don't know the details of how the land was obtained, who from or whatever, but the records must exist somewhere in council, obviously.
One of them, I think, was Raymond, his auntie, Ekaterina Ignatievna.
Well, the church was located in 20 Byron Place City, right in the centre of the city. And the people that started the church was mainly my auntie, Catherine, and then mother helped her.
Right at the beginning, after the Whitmore Square Church, she started to look for land, and she found this land on Green Hill Road and brought it before a meeting, and they decided yes. I think some people wanted it elsewhere, but seeing it's going to be in the centre, which is the city, and that's the best place to be because it's close to everybody and convenient to everyone. So they did decide, yes, we'll buy this land. So again, money was raised and to purchase this block of land on which the little church was built, and then eventually the big church, St. Nicholas, which is there now.
Спросили разрешение, чтобы искать другое это место, а приблизительно 1960 года они вот нашли вот этот участок. Было два участка. На одном участке был гараж. Они снесли гараж и построили временную церковь, вот, которая сейчас вот позади вот, этой церкви, которая называется наш зал. И там временно они совершали богослужение. Но зато не надо было им всегда снимать, убирать, потому что уже иконостас был поставлен и на месте, и поэтому все службы регулярно продолжались.
Я здесь при храме уже около 40 лет. И все эти 40 лет я здесь работал, ну как вам сказать, делал разные работы. Когда был еще здоровый, молодой, то я мог справиться с любой работой. Что нужно было сделать физически, умственно, это я все делал. Вот икона здесь висит, лампада. Это я все сделал там. И в то время, когда я сюда пришел, то этого ничего не было здесь. Церковь построила школу для детей, вот которая за залом тут сзади. И эту школу строили все люди, все прихожане. Я был один из них, тоже принимал в этом участие. У нас в храме стоят 3 подсвечника, стоят посреди храма. Один подсвечник и поддержка, как стол или что, я не знаю. Я уже забыл. В общем, это все я сделал сам своими руками и подарил это в наш храм.
The building was to be located on a patch of ground which in some spots in Adelaide consisted of so-called Biscay soil, a rather unstable, geologically unstable bit of ground, so that the entire structure had to be positioned on deep piers which went right into through the Biscay soil into the stable substrate to ensure that the building would not crack.
In the parish, you had a lot of people who were professional people, engineers, builders, carpenters. So where you could use the local skills, it was done by our people. So it was designed by people from our parish. One of our former treasurers, he was actually an engineer by profession. We had some architects in the parish as well.
My father, Vladimir Sergeyevich Pozhedaev, was an architect. My father, although he was an architect whose qualifications were not recognized in Australia, he was sent to paint farm machinery at Horwood Bagshaw's in Hindmarsh. There were plans afoot to build a permanent building, but of course that meant having a site and having money and getting somebody to design it and so on. Later on would have been the late 50s, I suppose, a contest was, a competition was set up for people to submit designs for a church in Adelaide. My father couldn't submit his own design because he was on the selection committee.
I think he did have a tender, but it wasn't accepted. The acceptance was, the church was accepted by architect Zimmerman.
И они проекты нового храма, когда выстроили, уже показали и так далее, то вот, значит, в то время они вот избрали тот проект, который нужен был для них.
When a design was finally selected by a colleague architect of my father's, he was either Latvian or Lithuanian, you'll have to check that. My father got the job of supervising the construction, the final design and construction and design of all the interior of the building, which occupied him for a number of years from then on. In fact, when he died in 1972, the interior of the building was still not quite completed. The altar screen the design was there and the altar screen was mostly built, but some final bits had to be still added and finished. So my mother took that job on after his death.
Pozhedaev, he built the iconostas, the wooden iconostas. That was his work, all the woodwork.
I don't remember him, but I think I vaguely remember his wife. and I think they were involved. I think they were involved in the design, not only the design of the church, but I think the main design of the iconostasis. So we've got the large timber iconostasis. I think that might have been done with some external carpentry, not all internal labour.
My mother got the job of completing the carvings. Most of the designs had been done, but they still had to be finalised, and she had to find the carvers to do them. They were done through a workshop in Norwood, and the carvers, as I remember, two of them in particular, were Spanish. They did a pretty brilliant job because it was quite a difficult, intricate task.
So the icon screen that you see behind me, in Russian it's the ikonostas. It's very warm because there's a lot of carved timber in it, but it's not particularly in a Russian style. Russian icon screens are usually much taller and narrower, whereas this one is a wide one and it's more in the Greek style. But again, I don't know what was behind the decision to make the ikonostas in that style, but I know that the Sisterhood, which is an organisation of women that are involved in the cleaning of the church and keeping all of the vestments and all of the other things in order. They used to hold events to raise money specifically for the building of the iconostas, and that there was, I think, a local wood carver that was employed to do a lot of the the woodwork in the church, and I think it gives it that contributes to giving a warm feel, because there is a lot of wooden features in the church.
6-7 лет, чтобы построить этот храм. И, как я помню, вот 1970 года было первое богослужение в этом храме. Храм сначала, вот как вы видите, вот здесь панели и так далее, на панелях висели иконы, вот большинство из этих икон, которые... А стены были белого цвета, иконописи еще не было. И вот иконопись началась с того времени, как я был назначен в этот приход. Значит, меня назначили 1989 года.
For many, many years, all the internal walls were white.
И иконопись мы начали 1990 года. Значит, и почему? Большинство из средств давал нам хор. Вот это первая часть этой росписи, вот эти столбам и до самого верха, до купола, значит, пожертвовал хор.
And every Christmas, the church choir, the choir master would get as many people from the choir that could sing, and on Christmas Day they'd visit houses in the parish, sing kalyatki, a number of Christmas carols, and they would raise money. And so over about let's say a good 30-year period, the choir raised money for a number of things, the big chandelier that's in the church, and eventually to do all the iconography inside the church, all the rospis.
How they did it was on Christmas Day, or when the service was finished, the choir would meet, and then they would go to people's places. A lot of people asked them to come over to sing just a few carols, and so they would start, say about 12 o'clock, and they would finish around about 11 at night.
Значит, работа была, иконописи проводилась одной нашей русской женщиной.
Antonina Ganina, I believe, and she came and helped as well, and they did it in several stages, so they were they didn't do it all in one hit, but they came for several times to finish it off, and yeah, it was a massive project, and Yeah, I think they did a particularly good job.
The Rospice was done by about 3 or 4 people. It was led by a priest monk, Father Alexis Rosenthal, and one of the crafts he learnt as a monk was painting icons. So he would paint traditional icons, various size, on board.
When the church was being frescoed with the paintings on the wall, the comment, I remember there was a comment made by the artist who was saying that our windows are too wide, they're too big, so they let in too much light. I think in traditional Russian churches they're normally a bit narrower.
One of the main ornaments of the interior of a Russian church is the central hanging light, the candelabra, the LED, based on the lights inside the main hall of the faceted palace, Granovite Palaty, in Moscow. Simplified, of course. However, unfortunately, it was never built in his lifetime, and then eventually they just bought a ready-made Greek one it was imported from Greece. Quite un-Russian, but it serves its purpose. The 7-branched candlestick, the candelabra which stands behind the altar, was completed when my father was still alive. He designed it, and it was cut out of thick duraluminum, but it then had to be given a textured surface, a hand-hammered textured surface. This textured surface was provided by a gentleman who was a Russian doctor, who was conscripted as a field surgeon during the Second World War into the Russian army. He was wounded, and as a result of his wound, he ended up with one leg shorter than the other because a piece of bone had to be cut out. Being an extremely good-looking man and slightly vain, I suppose, he decided that he didn't want to go limping for the rest of his life. So he took the chance of having his other leg shortened to match. When he returned from the war, his mother said, "Whatever's happened? My son is shorter than he used to be." Obviously, he'd lost about 5 centimeters in height as a result. His story in itself is rather fascinating. His surname was Busiani. It got shifted around in various ways in Australia. When he arrived in Australia, he first worked as a janitor in the Adelaide Hospital because his qualifications were not recognized. His mother, Varvara Artemievna Busiani, came from a noble family in Georgia. They lived in Tbilisi, and the family had servants, of course. And one of the servants had a son, young teenage son. She was about 12 at the time, Busiani's mother. And this boy aspired to go to the seminary, but he was illiterate. So to amuse herself, she taught him to read and write. No one will ever know whether the world would have been different if she hadn't. The teenage boys name was Josip Jugashvili, Stalin. She taught him to read and write. Anyway, her son subsequently hammered out the pattern on the candelabra for the Russian church, and there are photographs of it. The rest of the accoutrements for the altar, the cross that stands behind it, the two circular ripidi, I don't know what the English name is, were designed by my father but finished off by my mother after his death. They're in flat aluminium, cut out of flat aluminium, with an embossed carved double-headed eagle and cherubim in the center, and also they were gold-plated subsequently. My mother pretty much replicated them later for the church in Canberra. In the Russian church, before a new building of the church is consecrated, to bury in its foundations a small relic of a saint, not necessarily, in most cases, the patron saint of the church itself, after whom it's named. That's very seldom possible these days. And also to bury a time capsule containing a scroll with the description of where the church is built, by whom, how, and so on. This was done in Adelaide, of course, so that there is a small hole was chiseled into the foundation. I dug that out behind the altar, and in it were buried in a little silver box a fragment of the remains of Saint Juliana, Duchess of Alshans.
And one of our former staristas, a guy called, forgotten his patronymic, Ioan Nichiporenko, he was already in his late 60s. He actually tied the cross onto his back and climbed up the scaffolding and climbed up at the cupola and mounted the cross, the main cross, on the cupola himself.
A lot of volunteers, of course, had to take part in building the church, both in the straight-out labouring part and also in keeping the labourers happy and fed. Quite a lot of young people took part as well, sometimes just simple things like shifting bricks from the ground up onto the scaffolding platforms for the bricklayers to lay them.
My grandmother was telling me stories about what was happening on the Saturdays. So you had various ladies and babushki. They'd be cooking borscht and various food in their homes on a Saturday morning, and very few of the people at that time had their own cars in the 60s. So they'd be coming with kastrulik, big dishes full of borscht on public transport. They'd be catching buses and trains, and even from my grandmother's place, it was 2 buses to get to church. And they'd bring the food for the people who were working here on Saturday. They'd have lunch and then just keep on going, and then probably stop in time for the evening service on Saturday nights.
My father and my older brother were 2 people that volunteered on building the church, and we had a bit of a tradition that Saturday mornings my father would drop my mother and myself off in the car at the Central Market to do shopping, and then he would come here with my older brother and they would work, and then my mother and I would walk through the parklands to meet up here, and then we'd have some lunch and then we would all go home together.
Mainly on Saturday mornings. My mother and my stepfather, they also were a part of this working bee, because they used to bring lunch, prepare something at home. My stepfather was a very, very good cook. He was Hungarian. And they used to bring, you know, this beautifully prepared lunch.
And as for the ladies' auxiliary, they took turns in groups of 2 or 3 to provide meals, usually on a Saturday when the volunteers came to the site to work. Rather a delightful practice, because some of these ladies, many of these ladies, unlike my mother, I must admit, were excellent cooks. And there was probably a tiny bit of rivalry in terms of presenting the most spectacular dishes. One suspects slightly that some of the people, some of the volunteers who came to work on these Saturdays might have done so out of, shall we say, not entirely theological concerns, more in terms of the meals they were anticipating.
On Sundays, when they did have church services, the ladies, everyone participated, but they sewed aprons, and little babies' clothes were crocheted, and pirashki were made, and they organized lunches, anything to raise money. There's a lunch after the service, so everyone would come. They had barbecues, and this is while they were still in the little church. To raise money for the big one that we were having. So they all worked really hard, especially Raymond's parents, and there were many, many others that, and from that it grew. There was no other help. It was that. Catherine was always part of, she made it her business to be not in charge of the church, but she was always on the forefront of what is happening and what should we do next. Very interested in, she was a forthcoming lady, a very strong lady actually, no one that you would want to cross.
Мы в Австралию приехали в 1961 году. И, помогали в церкви. Как все, помогали. Там, значит, стряпали, пирожки продавали, это деньги собирали. Приходилось, нам всем, все люди помогали.
It was all voluntarily done, and so we have this quaint, wonderful church on Green Hill Road, yes.
Стараемся, так, как бы сказать, веру православную поддерживать и сами себе душу успокаивать. Ну и вот так мы и живем, как родители жили православной верой, и так и мы продолжаем, и так мы продолжаем. Что, если что-нибудь тяжело, помолишься, вроде тебе легче делается. Так, в церковь ходим, потому что облегчение души, и, как говорится, готовимся к загробной жизни, как говорится.
Нужна, если вы веруете, что в конце концов ваша душа найдет где-то какое место, там где-то выше. Да, и поэтому мы верим в Бога.
В церкви я работаю уже 20 лет, старшей сестрой. Я служу для церкви, убираю церковь, готовлю, на кухне работаю. Кто в церковь хочет прийти, нет, каждый должен сам себя знать. Я по своему желанию.
I've been involved in decorating the church and just following following the traditions that we've basically inherited from our grandparents, and similarly involved in the decoration of the church for Pascha, where in the middle of the church, just before the afternoon service on Good Friday morning, there'd be a reading service called the Royal Hours. That would finish at about 10 o'clock. Then a group of us would come in, start decorating the church, where the men would be involved in a bit of a final clean-up and setting up the centre area, where we'd have commemorating the tomb, set up the tomb of Christ, where eventually the Pleshchenitsa would sit.
The Requiem is amazing, the Russian Orthodox Requiem. I think it kind of gives people who are grieving a time to reflect on the life of the person whom they have come to, to say goodbye. And so all these, it will be a continuance, and people will continue to come. I'm hoping, anyway.
In the early days of the Russian community in Adelaide, virtually all members of the community, when they died, were buried in the same cemetery at Dudley Park in northwest Adelaide. That part of Dudley Park Cemetery is currently known as the Old Russian section. There has been some talk that it will be given heritage status. This hasn't happened yet, so that the graves are still liable to be reused when their leases expire. Most members of my family, my maternal grandparents, my paternal grandparents, and my father and mother are buried at that cemetery, as well as my uncle, my mother's sister's husband, who was a deacon at the church and who is buried near the little chapel in the old Russian part of Dudley Park Cemetery.
Well, the importance of the Russian Orthodox Church is really to bring people together, and also the new children that are being born, their parents are baptizing them in the Russian Orthodox Church. They are bringing them for communion on Sunday mornings. Whether they will continue the children when they grow up, you probably haven't seen too many young people teenagers, but they do eventually come back.
Замужем за австралийцами, и я не настаиваю, чтобы они сюда ходили, в православную церковь, потому что их семья живут, они живут как австралийцы. Хочу мешаться в их собственную жизнь. Это их жизнь, они знают, что они делают.
I used to bring my children, even though they would be rolling their eyes and complaining about a pain in their feet. And one time, my son, who was about 10 or 11, he was complaining about his feet, and then Natasha was as well, and she's 2 years younger, to which he turned to her and said, "It's all right for you, your feet are younger than mine." And so, and now my son is 52 and has chosen to marry in the Russian Orthodox Church.
Everything's set up to create a prayerful atmosphere and create that otherworldly feel, that spiritual feel. And a lot of people sense that when they can come into a church for the first time and say, experience a wedding, experience a Russian wedding, the wedding service, and just sort of the importance, say, like Orthodox people put on a wedding.
In the process of time, this church may not remain sort of as a Russian church, but it will always be an Orthodox church, and eventually, in the process of time, that the services will be conducted in English. Like, for example, I went to Japan many years ago, and I went to visit an Orthodox church, and it was set up by Orthodox missionaries in Japan, but all the service is in Japanese. Even though the singing, I could recognise all the melodies because it's the same melodies we sing, but they've just put Japanese words to it. So I think over the process of time, things evolve, and I know this is what I see sort of happening here. So I think the roots are there, but where it evolves to, well, it's hard to say.
Why the church was set up? Basically, the people that came, our Russian people that came out from Russia wanted to preserve their faith. Once upon a time, the thought was the church abroad would be used as a shell to preserve our Orthodox Christianity in the way the Russian people normally worshipped, and that in the hope that one day Russia would be free of communism and the faith would be able to come back. But as we all know, that you can't take the Christian faith away from the Russians. That everybody who stayed behind in Russia, that the truly devout people found a way of keeping their faith. And since Perestroika, we've seen that all the wonderful restoration work that's been going on, and that the church abroad eventually reunited with the Russian church back in the homeland.
So we still maintain the old Church Slavonic as a language that we serve in, and we have our service books, which are all in Old Church Slavonic.
It would be true to say that in the 50s and 60s in particular, the church, both as a building and as a concept, was the central unifying factor for the Russian community in Adelaide. It served both the community's spiritual needs, whether the building itself was temporary or the permanent church that it is now, but it served as well as a cultural centre and as a social centre, both for the, I suppose, rather deprived, somewhat lost older generation, particularly those who didn't speak English fluently, or not at all in some cases, and found it difficult to adapt and adopt the customs of another country. But also for the young, for whom it served as a training ground and as a source of information about their own identity, as well as, of course, simply a social focal point to meet, make friends, have fun. So it was extremely important. Probably its significance has diminished somewhat gradually over the years, particularly when the younger generation, some of whom don't even speak Russian properly, let alone Church Slavonic, which makes it difficult with church services, although the church has now started translating in English or sometimes providing in services in both languages alternately. And also when the younger generation started finding friendships and interests outside the immediate Russian circle. So its future, whether it remains as important as it is or as it was then, remains to be seen. But certainly in the 50s and 60s, it was extremely important.
The experience of an Orthodox church is just not all mental. You experience it with your heart and you know, and with your soul. And that's why the beauty of the church, the beauty of the service, you know, the richness of the vestments, and then the singing should be at a high level, because it's, as I said, it's not just all something that you understand with your intellect, because your intellect is only one aspect of a person's being. It's the church, I think, and church services and the worship, I think it has to touch your heart as well, and your heart has to be involved. And that's why aesthetically it should be beautiful. There should be like nothing, I think, ugly or, you know, but then on the other hand, you know, we're humans and we're not perfect either, but we just try to do our best. That's my view.